Okay, so, what kinds of violence are common or commonly perpetrated against the LGBT community?
There's a range of types of violence that is reported commonly by people in the GLBT or the gay, lesbian, bi, and trans community. And it depends on the type of violence and where it occurs as to what resources and options and support there may be available for the persons that experience it. But the best way to go into combat this is through education. Oftentimes, one of the main driving forces behind violence against the GLBT community is misinformation about things like the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity. We teach towards the ideal. We have families that look very different, but they're no less of a family. Families are changing in response to many different external factors. Their central values, what's really important, what holds them together, the glue that binds, is still exactly the same. Well, they have the one thing that really matters, the absolute most, is love. People are not boxes, they're people. And so therefore, there's all kinds of different people, there's all kinds of different families, and there's no one perfect way to be a family, just like there's no one perfect way to be a person. And the main thing that unites a family isn't the walls around it, but it's the love that's within.
Family is the people you love, who love you, who are there to support you, and who you can call on, and they can call on you.
They help each other, they stand by each other.
The people that really care about you.
The people that you feel like you love unconditionally and that you are so close to that you could share anything with.
Where you feel safe and supported and cared for.
You know, you can really rely on and that are, going to be there for you through the good times and the bad times.
They grow with the times.
So family is people you choose to be with, who love you, who support you, challenge you, that you share the journey of life with, that hopefully you can build them up and they lift you up as well.
I was really clueless. I was of a generation where this sort of thing wasn't talked about, and I only heard terms like effeminate and fairy. Those were mannerisms. That's literally all I really knew. So I knew that David had some of those mannerisms, but that's all I knew, and I didn't really care because there was more to him than that, and that drew me to him. Unexplainable, but really strong. So I didn't even think about those things being important. But that's what came to mind when he said he was gay. And so there I sat with just that little bit of information, and when that's all you know, you can't do much of anything. So I had to ask him to keep talking to me and help me learn, to empower me to be able to do anything to help him the way he had helped me. Mm-hmm.
One day I had this epiphany. I was driving along the roadway on a Sunday afternoon. It was a really nice day. And I had this flash that if I was going to die, I might as well die as a woman. I didn't want to die as a man. So I told my therapist, he said, I think you're ready for therapy. So that's when I started going to therapy with the family. So my transition has been later in life, not earlier. And I think that if I had transitioned early, I'd never be here. I wouldn't be talking to you guys right now, and I would never have been married. We've been married for 42 years. I got married as a male in 1974, September 9th, 1974.
No.
Oh, September 7th. I tend to forget those things.
I invited someone to go hiking at the cabin, and this guy, it snowed, so we couldn't go hiking, so we stayed by the warm fire, and we had this, I suppose you could call it an innocent kiss, but it was so amazingly powerful. And I said, I think I'm gay. And he said, oh, you are so gay. You need to find other gay people.
Sexual orientation is who one is attracted to or fantasizes about, who one is sexually active with. It's those butterflies in your stomach. It's that wonderful person or people that just makes you so excited and want to kiss and touch and hug and be romantic.
The definition of pansexual is when you are attracted to any gender, any identification, whether they be trans, gay, queer, agender, asexual, whatever, that person is attracted to them based on just their personality. They don't really take into account gender or sexuality.
What lesbian is not? Well, that's that's a perfect question, because when I was growing up, that's mostly what I had to answer. It wasn't what it was it's not man-hating. I'm not with women because I hate men. It's not because something happened to me that made me damaged. It's my natural affinity and love for women. And that's who I get my heart connection with and my love connection with.
Being bisexual is not being a party girl. I think that that's a common misconception that, there's girls who I get drunk at a party and I'll make out with another girl for attention, so I'm bisexual kind of thing. And I think that that is harmful to the image of people who are actually bisexual. Definitely being bisexual does not mean that you can't be sexually aroused unless you have both a man and a woman, because to me at least they're completely different things. I like both, but they're just not the same at all. Just because I like chicken and I like turkey doesn't mean I need them both on one plate. And it definitely doesn't mean that I need a turducken.
I didn't have a word to describe asexual until after I graduated college. I always figured I was just a late bloomer. During my teens, even as a kid, in my early 20s, I kept waiting to experience something and see what is the big deal. I was a little confused as to why everybody else wanted to go on dates and stuff. I did go to the prom with someone because we got to go to the amusement park the next day. But anybody who went to the prom and wore a dress got to go to the amusement park the next day. I figured that was fair trade. I would occasionally be asked, well, do you like guys? And I would say, I like some of them as friends. And the next logical question was, well, do you like girls as friends? So I basically just kept waiting for something to happen. Figured I would be attracted to one or the other or both sooner or later. But as time went on and nothing happened, I wondered if there was something wrong with me or if there was a different way to describe what was happening. And so when I looked at the terminology, I said, okay, if homosexual means you're attracted to the same sex, heterosexual means you're attracted to the opposite sex, bisexual means you're attracted to both of them. Somebody who's not attracted to either would have to be asexual. And when I finally got online and typed that in, it was just starting to come out as a term. And I didn't claim it as an identity until much later, but I knew that at least the possibility existed, and it wasn't just that for some reason I was reaching 25 and 30 and physically had hit puberty, but emotionally and sexuality-wise was still waiting to develop.
So we went backpacking, and it was in Death Valley, and I swear he whined so much. He is lucky that I ever didn't get rid of him then and there. He whined and complained, and we brought one of his mutual friends, so there were 3 of us, and they just talked about cameras and bicycle parts and brand names, and I was trying to, being a teacher, I was trying to explain to them about the trilobites and the different animals in the rocks, and they didn't even listen. They just marched on, and him whining. It was terrible. There's no water. It was Death Valley after all.
He helped fix some of my whining problems. I basically was just at the age where carrying a 50-pound pack just wasn't going to work anymore for a guy my size and age. So he was into the ultralight backpacking, and he kind of dragged me kicking and screaming into the 21st century of light backpacking.
We actually met on a website on the internet. We started messaging back and forth, and then we exchanged numbers and started texting and calling a lot. And then he ended up coming here to visit for a little while. I decided during his visit that I knew he was the one that I wanted to be with.
I decided that, I thought it would be a good idea to move from Florida to California to be together.
I was very worried when Richard first met Edie because I didn't know how they would react. I didn't know if I was causing pain to Edie. So I was very relieved that they met, when they met, that they got along very well.
Yes, when I first saw Richard in the doorway, you just get a sense of a person, and then I got to hug him, and that just was a confirmation. This is a really sweet, gentle soul, and I'm happy.
I'm usually a very more of a visual processor than audio, but so I don't remember. But oddly enough, I don't remember visually what took place at the doorway, but I remember the hug, and it had a genuineness to it, and I'm big on hugs, so feel like an authority on the subject, and I knew it was going to be okay.
Beautiful. You see, I had a lifelong love affair with motorcycles, and when I first transitioned, I put it all away. And it was less to do with other people's expectations to my own. Somewhere in my head, I thought that a middle-aged woman doesn't work on motorcycles. So I thought it was the incorrect thing to do. And so I put it away for a couple of years, and it'd been such a huge part of my life. I really missed it. And so I came back to it, and I just dovetailed so well into it. And I find that now, having all this estrogen running through my brain, I'm actually more creative than I used to be. So it's really worked out very, very well. And people in the motorbiking community have been very accepting, because they tend to be a pretty eclectic bunch anyway, so nobody gives any mind to the fact that I'm transgender. It's just, Emma's a great mechanic, and if I know that if I leave my bike with Emma, it's going to get fixed.
Gender identity is your sense of being male, female, all the genders, or none of the genders, or just a couple of genders. It doesn't come from our genitals like we thought. So it doesn't come from there. Where the heck does it come from? What genders us? I'm glad you asked that question. What genders us is our brains. So this is not my drawing of a brain. And this is where gender comes from. Specifically, our research has found that gender comes from back around in here, because it's the hypothalamus that genders us. It's just a little bitty nub back there, really. Gender isn't two boxes. It is a universal universe of infinite possibilities. I mean, how beautiful is that? Because there's no one right way to be a man or a woman or agender or pangender. There's a million wonderful, beautiful ways to define, to express, to be. And no right answer. The only right answer is what works for you.
There's a lot of terms that are used to kind of like define gender, but like in my mind, really there's like gender essentialism on the one end and gender fluidity on the other. Where like on the one side, like gender essentialism is like there is actually something in essence called maleness or femaleness or femininity or masculinity, and that's something that's like timeless and it's internal and like you're born with it, versus queer theory, which is kind of the antithesis to that, which says there is nothing that is internal and all of these things are socially conditioned and reproduced and like arise from different social conditions.
One day, we had been married for a few years, and I was a lot of years, and one day Pam says, you got legs like a girl. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you're tall, your legs are proportioned to what a woman would be like, a tall woman, and most girls would fight for your legs. So I had this thought, and I said, well, what do you think they look like in pantyhose? And she said, I couldn't remember, is that, she said, yeah, I think they look great. So I went to the bedroom, put on a pair of pantyhose and came out and showed her, and I think she kind of said, well, they look great on you. And so that was how we kind of started this ball rolling.
I think I first realized I was trans when I was fairly little, but it was really, I more realized it looking back and like understanding that experience where I just like, people would explain things away with my gender. We're like, oh, this is because you're a girl, not necessarily barring me from things for being a girl, but just like, oh, this is because you're a girl or whatever. And it didn't really make sense to me, and I kind of thought, like, well, like, why do I have to be a girl? And, like, I understood it as far as, like, how it's set up in society's framework, where, like, you're born with these genitals and you're assigned this gender at birth, and, like, that's what you are. But other than that, like, outside of that, it just didn't really make sense to me.
Pretty recently, maybe like less than a year ago, I started identifying as they and like gender queer. But it's not important. Like, I really don't care if someone misgenders me.
And when people use she, her pronouns for me, it feels really invalidating because that was the gender that I was assigned at birth, and it just feels like people are completely like ignoring and disrespecting my gender.
I went to therapy, then I started buying clothes, and I would go to Goodwill, because that's a good place to go for clothing, especially starting out. You buy everything like cheaper. But then we had these wonderful arguments, not really arguments where you're fighting, with fists and knives and killing each other and screaming. These were more like animated ones in bed where I'd talk and she'd pose these questions to me like, why am I spending more money on clothing than spending money on the family? And so we'd have these conversations in bed, in the afternoons or in the evening, and I have to come up with these like, well, because I need these, because I need to do certain things. And so I said, why? I said, well, because I'm becoming female. And so these led to other things, and so I think by then she had this idea that I was becoming what at the time we'd call it transsexual. So becoming a transsexual female, but I had not yet said I am transsexual or a...
It's not even close to my story.
Okay, well, you can tell in a few minutes here. Well, I'll tell my story, okay? So that was kind of like how we started this ball rolling toward me becoming who I am now. Take it away, Professor.
Professor. I remember, first of all, cross-dressing I've known since before we married. I mean, she told me she wore female underwear and stuff, so that was not a new thing to me. But as time went on and she wanted to dress more often, we decided that she would go out of town. So, and this was mostly for the boys' benefit for a while, because they're in a hard place. Middle school and high school is crazy. So she did. She went to San Jose or San Francisco or, somewhere where we probably wouldn't run into, their friends or their friends' parents. She began to be kind of, well, I don't know if mean is exactly it, but certainly no patience, and she'd snap at everybody, and I was just feeling like she was becoming more depressed and more depressed. So when she brought up the fact that she felt she needed to live as a female all the time, that's when I finally went ahead and said, you know what, you need to do that because your personality's changing.
And this is my environment. I'm very, very happy here. I'm never happier than when I'm in a big pile of old motorcycles, because it's bringing them back. You present it with something that might not have run in 30 years, in 40 years, and you bring it back and you hear its voice. And the excitement of hearing that bike for the first time, because you know that a Triumph is going to sound this way or a BMW is going to sound this way, but you haven't heard that one. And when you first start it up and you hear the bike's voice, it's absolutely fabulous. It's a wonderful feeling. And the longer it's been off the road, the better the feeling is.
It's really important for me to continue to center the reality that I was raised and I'm conditioned as a man. That's really important because how we're taught and how we're raised really affects how we take over spaces, right? Because if I started just walking around the world being oh, I'm genderqueer, there's no part of me that's a man, I'm free of my gender, then I would go into feminist spaces and just talk all the time and be really loud and just take over and just be a total man, right? That is something that is fundamentally a part of my existence. I can never get rid of that, right? That is something that I was taught from day one.
I asked to go to counseling with Cameron 3 times. Because truthfully, there's really nothing for the spouses. Nothing. Nobody talks about all the stuff that we have to go through. But there's a whole lot of people who talk to the transgendered person. So I decided that I would go with her 2 or 3 times and we'd get some things straightened out in counseling. So one of them for me was a little bit more understanding about what Cameron was going through, particularly about all the adolescent behavior, which I pointed out to the therapist that Cameron's not an adolescent. She's a grown-up person and she has a family. So spending money that we don't have doesn't work. And there is no excuse for that. So, there's no praising her for that. But she's going through her stages, she said. Well, she can go through her stages broke like all other teenagers. So we settled that one.
Yeah,
what it meant to be a man in Sudan, 15 years ago is completely different than what it meant to be a man in the East Coast and different places that I've lived versus here versus different friends groups and it's all these things, right? There's aspects and queer theory tries to show that gender is this huge list of acts and this huge list of things, right? Like, to be a woman is to sit a specific way, to eat a specific way, to talk a specific way. You know, you're expected of different things, right? But like that list isn't concrete. There have been times where I'll like come home with like I love painting my nails and I love wearing like really flashy earrings and like just, I love just dressing really girly as much as I can, even though it's like really scary sometimes and it's like really hard and like I can't do it all the time. And every day I kind of have to like ask myself like if I'm comfortable enough to do it or whatever. And you know, sometimes I'm not, sometimes I am. But I think for me, it's really important to just approach all of these things with like, to be patient with these things and to be very loving about these things. Because I have friends who are trans. I have a friend who's transitioning now, and they're going through a very difficult time, you know. But like, of course, I'll be there for them, even though like we probably fundamentally like disagree about what it means to be a gender, right? Like we've had awesome discussions about it. We've had like great like all night, like we just sit up and like talk about the stuff.
One of the people in the Black Lives Matter locally is very Christian based. And on her Facebook page, she posted Leviticus. And there are some times when I can just go, okay. But some days where you just go, I just can't let this one go. But she's a wonderful, hard worker, social justice, community builder. I didn't want to come on hard on her, no, but so I just said, we'll just have to agree to disagree. And she wrote back a wonderful thing that was very open, and we had maybe a 12 back and forth response that when you step away from it and look at it, it's sort of a beautiful little snapshot of what allyship is. We don't have to agree on everything. We're going to probably agree on most things. There's so much more in common. And maybe we can talk about the things that we don't see. Because what I said is someday, when we have time, I will sit down and I will tell you the violence and horrors that have been put upon me and my community based on that one line out of the Bible. While everyone forgets every other thing about judge not lest ye be judged and all that stuff. I said, sometime it'd be good to talk about that. But until then, I respect what you do. I love what you do. You make my world richer, and I know we really found some common ground. So that was good.
Christianity about me is loving and treating people how Christ did. And it didn't matter to Christ in fact, there's plenty of stories in the Bible of lepers and thieves and what you may refer to as non-desirables interacting with Christ. And he never treated them in a manner that people are treating each other nowadays.
It was also clearly stated in the Bible why they said homosexuality was wrong. And there was a big issue with the covenant of marriage. At that time, people were committing homosexual acts and saying, well, these are acceptable because I couldn't even be married to this person because marriage is only between a man and a woman.
We chose to stay married because, well, for me, this is the guy I knew I wanted to be with forever. And as long as I had that chance, I was going to take it. But in the back of my mind, I always thought, if David and Richard want to get married and change the relationship, I would do anything because I was already happy. I didn't need this marriage to keep me happy in the state I was. But I needed David to be able to do whatever he needed to do to be as happy as I was. I didn't know what it was going to take, but I was willing to go there because I had everything I ever wanted.
Unconditional love means that you want the other person's happiness is just as important as your happiness. So to me, it makes sense that she would say those things. And I couldn't imagine why we would need to separate our lives. Our lives, we're married for a very long time, and our lives are so tangled up. And why separate them at this stage in our life, especially? It might have been different if we were younger.
I really don't have any problem with Edie and David still being married. And in fact, I would really be opposed to anything that would disrupt that marriage. I don't need that, and it just seems like there'd be no upside to them divorcing.
My favorite thing about Cameron is she makes me laugh all the time. She's maybe the funniest person I know. She's a little sarcastic and dry humor, and sometimes even gross humor. But it makes me laugh every day, and that is worth hanging out with Cameron to me forever.
She's the only person I know that will take my sense of humor with indifference. Doesn't get too crazy, and she'll look at me with the yeah, right. And then I was like, oh well,
Nothing really changed for us, and so to break our vows just because of this, and since we'd already had our children and all, I don't know, it doesn't seem practical. At this point, we were each other's best friend. You don't just throw away your best friends.
Finally, you can get married. And growing up gay, I'm like, it's a little carrot that gets dangled and you think, well, pretty much screw you. At some point, I'm tired of going to weddings. I'm tired of, you can get married 5 times. It's more important than my. So I had a bad attitude. But our daughter really wanted us to get married. So we got married right before Prop 8 happened. And we were trying to keep it small. We were just going to do something here. And my family said, no, we're coming. And my partner actually had she's from Missouri, and only one of her family members acknowledged, but she came. But unbeknownst to me, there was a drama going on with one of my mom's sisters, an aunt. And my mom said, just off the cuff, I can't believe she's doing this after what she did to you around her daughter's wedding. I said, what did she do to me around her daughter's wedding? I don't remember anything about that. Well, there had been this huge drama. I had not been invited to the wedding because I was the scourge of the family. And I had no idea this was going on, and it was a big thing, because I'm pretty liked in my family, but it's Southern Ohio. And now this aunt's peeved because we're not inviting her to our wedding here. So we had we ended up not inviting her because we really were trying to keep it small, but she and I then had to do some repair afterwards, and I'd let her know it wasn't a revenge thing, and that was another sweet time. She and her husband said they were sorry they hadn't been more supportive of me throughout the years. So that was sweet. But my mother came, my brothers came, they walked my mom down the aisle. Our daughter walked us down the aisle, and as we got closer and closer to the wedding date, it did become very important to me. It was pretty sweet how that happened.
Wesley was in 6th grade, and we were at Eastern Washington. And in Eastern Washington, it's very conservative, and the kids' hobbies are blowing heads off of pheasants and stuff like that. And it was just contrary to Wesley's world. We moved here from Salinas Valley to that, and so he would go in the bathroom at lunch, and any breaks, he'd go in the bathroom and he'd stand on the toilet so they couldn't see his feet, because he didn't want to be bullied. Because he came as a blonde-headed California kid wearing a jeans jacket, and they just bullied him because he was different. So his teacher, who had a son who, I don't know if he was gay, but she said to him, she said, one of my sons is very much like you, and one of these days you're going to go someplace and you're going to find a lot of people just like you. And he came home and told me that. She said, I'm going to find a lot of people just like me. And then he went to Missoula Children's Theater, is a theater that comes to your school and puts on a play in a week. And he was invited to their camp. And he went out to the camp. It's on a beautiful lake, I can't think of the name of it, in Montana. And they spend 2 weeks on the lake in barracks. Then they go into Missoula to the theater and put on a show. And when I went to pick him up, he started to cry in the backseat of the car. He says, Mom, I never want to leave. I found 67 people just like me. And so he went to that camp every year until he was in high school. And he had found a group of people who were just like him. He didn't, you think, well, living in a dorm situation, somebody's going to be hiding your clothes or short sheeting your bunk or something. But he found everybody who was interested in doing a play and had the same feelings inside as he did. So that was a wonderful thing, wonderful changing point in his life, I think.
I think being a parent has taught me more about family values than anything, because I want her to feel she has a safe place to land, a safe place to launch from. That whole thing about you give them roots and you give them wings. You ground them and you let them go and urge them on their way. And by becoming a parent, I've really watched this recently. I've become much more appreciative of my parents and the struggles they had to go to accept me coming out. Not being what they thought they were getting with their little girl. And they gave me what I needed to grow and to be a productive member and loving member of the community. And I'm hoping I'm passing that on to the next generation.
We were very fortunate that David took the second year off to take care of Clayton. It was a critical time for Clayton. David said, I don't know what you need, Clayton. You're going to have to talk to me. And so Clayton started talking early. And it worked out really well, made it easier for both of us.
And I think because I took the year off to take care of him, it made our connection a lot deeper. So that when Edie took care of him the first year, he would cry for mommy. The next year, he would cry for daddy. And also I thought it was amusing that he called the kitchen appliances daddy's tools. He was cute.
My plans for the future as far as becoming a mother are somewhat on hold right now, or at least a little bit uncertain. I've just had another miscarriage. I do know that I want to have children. It takes a bit more planning and a far larger commitment financially, medically, logistically, to go into that and become a parent either through artificial insemination or IVF or adoption or anything else than it does for someone who has a partner and conceives naturally. Other than that, I don't think, in some ways I don't think I'm prepared to be a parent, but I don't think anybody is until they get there. It's very much an on-the-job training thing. My parents did a wonderful job raising us and accepting our differences and letting us go in different directions. That's something that I value and I would like to pass on. Infertility has been a larger issue for me than asexuality in terms of becoming a parent.
My daughter is not your typical anything. She thinks outside the box, and when she was 5, she told me she was heterosexual and was worried that I would not be accepting it. I said, actually, I know several of them, they're fine, no problem. And it's been sort of fun for us. And as she's gotten older, it's not just that she's heterosexual and that's it. There's so many ways to describe yourself. And I love it on one level that she's choosing all sorts of things and it's fluid. And I get very confused and I just go, okay, the label doesn't matter. She's happy, she's loved, and that feels good. But boy, there's a lot more options than I had when I was growing up. A lot more places to check. Yeah.
When I first started thinking about coming out to people, it was really nerve-wracking. It was scary. I mean, you never know what's going to happen. And the thing is, I'm lucky and I came from a family that's super understanding and super accepting of anyone, really. So my main thing was realizing that it's definitely okay to just be you.
I remember the first thing that my dad asked after I told him, like, hey, I'm a trans guy. He said, word for word, he said, are you going to get the surgery? And I said, no. And he said, well, that sucks. As if, like, me not getting the surgery, whatever that is, will mean that I'm not a guy. I don't think he's actively trying to not understand, but he's not actively trying to understand either, because he thinks that it won't do anything. And maybe it won't, but it's a little, I guess, maybe annoying that he doesn't appear to try to do any reading or anything. I guess my dad, for the most part, is just clinging to the old me, because he's told me, like, oh, when I first held you in my arms when you were a baby, I dreamed about walking you down the aisle at your wedding or something. And it's like, that might not have even happened either way. Like, whether I was cis or trans or, like, whatever, it might not have even happened. I don't know why that was, like, your immediate thought. That's a little weird, in my opinion.
Well, it feels like you lost somebody that died. I mean, Butch wasn't going to be there anymore. Cameron was. So we're never going to see Butch again. Surely not the way he looked.
We were on an evening walk in our neighborhood, and he just kept pointing to these things and these things, and he finally says, Mom, I'm gay, I'm gay. And I can't say exactly my reaction at that point, because both my children were in theater before they were in school. And so we've been around a lot of gay people, and I had no prejudice. But what happens to you at that moment is you start thinking, in those days particularly before marriage equality, you start thinking, oh no, the dream that you had isn't going to be. And you think, oh, they won't ever get married, they won't have children, but these will all be different. And so the term I use for that is positive grief. For just a minute or even maybe a little longer, you have this grief. Oh, it's not going to work out like I expected. And then you start having all of these wonderful inclusions in your life. And you think, wow, this is better than it could have been. And you're so thrilled. So my son says he frequently uses that term, positive grief, when he's talking to his friends who are having a hard time getting their parents to understand it.
I would sort of go through some of those stages people go through when they've lost a person they love. And you do. You get a little angry sometimes. Then you kind of, you go through that little bit of denial. Well, maybe they'll change back, but then you begin to accept it, and, that's just fine.
I mean, yeah, when I finally told my mom, she needed a little bit of explanation as to what it was. She was perfectly okay with me being lesbian or bisexual or heterosexual. She was a little confused that I was asexual, but she doesn't have a problem with it. And none of my other siblings do either. And I have not really experienced any problems with revealing it to anybody else either.
It might have been a family friend that I talked to about this the first time. It was really nice. They were really cool and chill. They identify as queer, so and they actually had participated in a polyamorous relationship at one point. So it was really easy to talk to them about it, and it was really comforting. And then with my mom, it was a little different, but she was very supportive, so it was totally fine. And then I told my dad, and he was totally fine with it. No problems. It was actually, I didn't have to worry about judgment or anything, so it was nice.
I think your dad knows, but it's one of those, if I don't say it, it's not real.
My family members that are accepting of our relationship, I did expect them to be, and then the ones that are not, I also, kind of expected them probably not to be accepting as well.
David could not get himself to come out to Clayton. He just couldn't. And Clayton was going to go off to Japan, teach English with this JET program. So I thought, I've got to tell him. So I sat him down and I told him, and he looks at me and said, well, I'm not gay. Like, what's the big deal? I'm going off to Japan. I've got things I've got to do. And that's what I wish for everybody, to be able to think of it as no big deal. It's just another part of a person, and let's get on with life.
When he came out, he had been working as a peer counselor at a school, and he was, he told me that and stuff. And I did the first time he came out, the first night, I used a very disrespectful term, and I still working on an apology for that. And I said, well, I think that's very self-indulgent of you to come out. I know now that it was not self-indulgent of him to tell me that he was speaking his truth, and he had to speak his truth to be able to live his life. So that's one thing that's the one thing I would change. I would have not used that term.
I was very much myself, had a girlfriend, doing great, and yet with my family, they knew, but we didn't talk about it until I got cancer. And I had a very hard time with the radiation, and I had to be in isolation where my family could only come in for like 10 minutes a day and see me. And my father, who I've been very close with, chose that time to go, this is because you're man-hating lesbian ways. And somewhere in there, something went off in me, and I went, pretty much, screw you, inside. And I thought, if I'm gonna get out of this thing alive, I have to totally take who I am, be proud of who I am with no matter who. And if that means I have to lose my family, I'll lose my family. But until then, I wasn't ready to make that, to really challenge them to say, this is who I am, accept it all, or, I was trying to please still. But when that happened, it was like, if I'm gonna survive, I have to do it my way, and things changed a lot then. So it was really a blessing in disguise, that whole bit.
And then his public coming out. He was on a TV show called Boy Meets Boy. And the premise was they took 12 guys to Palm Springs, and then they took one gay man and a girl who was kind of the, she carried the show, telling, and so the premise was the guy had to go out with all of these 12 guys, and he had to, if he picked for the winner, the gay one, then the two of those won a vacation together. And so he did pick my son. I think it ran 10 or 12 weeks, and he did pick my son. Well, the interesting part was I would have people emailing me, because Wesley had been an actor all his life. And they'd say, boy, they just don't know how good an actor he is, do they? They don't know what a good actor he is, do they? And of course, I couldn't respond to that. And actually in the Monterey Herald, well, Wes Caldwell is shown in the yearbook of being favorite of all the girls, and we know he's an actor, so it was very interesting. And so then the last night of the show, he was chosen, and they kissed. And it was the first, I think, man-man kiss on TV. It was on Bravo. And so I got emails from people, and they'd say, was he still acting? Is this true, Or this can't be true. Or then I had people who, when I met them at the grocery store, whatever, they didn't meet my eyes anymore. And then I had people who were very accepting. We were surprised. We're not really surprised, because he'd been in theater all of his life, and he sang quite well, all this. So it sort of was a stereotype, but they were all surprised that he came out as gay. And so it was a kind of an interesting public coming out. And then how people's reaction to me was as the gay parent, and that's the thing. I think all gay parents of gay children have to come to how they're going to respond to people who what they say to them, if they attack them or if they say positive things. How are you going to talk to them, those people who are introducing the fact that your son's gay to you? Yeah.
Change happens when people come together united as a community, speaking together with one voice, as one powerful, strong, united voice that is empowered. They can go and have the ability to educate the general community, to go and to help implement the changes that are necessary for basic human rights, like the ability to go to the bathroom, or the ability to access medical care without being molested or raped to see what you have, to higher order civil rights, such as marriage, passports, birth certificates. So it's really important that the community is a united front, a strong united front, and one voice.
Sometimes I feel like bisexuals are not as included, like because some bisexuals, you know, live more like a straight person, because, you know, like me, I have a boyfriend, so I could be straight, but I'm not. So, and like as I've mentioned earlier, sometimes I feel like a little bit of disdain maybe, or like judgment from people that are very gay and very like into the community, because I feel like sometimes they feel like it's not as much of a commitment like if you're bisexual.
Sometimes the community seems splintered rather than whole, and I think that's something we should all work on, honestly.
That is scary in a way. You know, we belong to this minority of a sort, you know, this LGBT community, and that belonging is kind of cool, even though we shouldn't even have to be singled out that way. And in the process of becoming incorporated and homogenized into society, we're going to lose that and lose that identity, and it seems scary, but a lot of good things involve a little scary along the way, and I believe that the net result is going to be well worth it.
You need diversity for a healthy ecosystem. Areas where there's only one kind of predator or one kind of prey are horribly vulnerable to any outside disaster. Bacterial colonies with little genetic variation are very susceptible to radiation or antibiotics. Our bodies need a healthy balance, a diverse microflora in order to protect us and keep us functioning. It's having everything be the same is just not, it puts you in a place of horrible vulnerability, but it also puts you where you're losing out on a lot of benefits.
So one of the things that we very oftentimes as advocates and all do is we tend to go from our own position. I am a Caucasian male, and so I tend to see the world through those glasses. Everything I look at is colored by my experience being Caucasian and being male. But I have to think about, when I'm part of a community, it's not just me. There's an intersection of where other identities meet that are not mine. So intersection, what is that? It's really just exactly what it sounds like. So it's like an intersection where identities meet. And so there can be 2 identities, 4 identities, 99 a billion gazillion identities that meet at that intersection. And that intersection is that one beautiful person. So in specific, when we're talking about the GLBT community, it's really important, because maybe my position as a white, male, transgendered person might be different, and I might have different needs or different things that are important than somebody that may be African American, gay, and upper class. It's really important that we do work collaboratively or together, and we discuss these beautiful intersections of identity, the barriers to access that might be there for these other folks. And we open our minds to think about and work together for the greater good of all.
You know, I love the word intersectionality, and I am slow to it. We have a group that we started. It's called Whites for Racial Equity. I really fought the name because it's very hard to say white and not, for me, have some shame or have people think supremacy. But some very close friends of mine of color said whites have really got to step up. You got to own your whiteness. You got to get out there and you got to start talking, because you're going to get into rooms and you're going to be with people that I'll never get invited into. So step up and start doing your work. Stop coming and being sorry for us and then going back to your little bubbles. And it really got to me. So we now have a pretty big group in Monterey.
With the trans people, I think that it is hard, especially, and so there's a difference in how I see a transgender person that's not Asian or Filipino, because we have a different culture.
It's a culture.
Philippines, being gay and lesbian is a little different than being here. It's not as malicious as it is here. They're kind of not really accepted, but they're tolerated. Well, being Filipino trans, I think, is slightly different than being Caucasian and trans. But generally, 90% of all the groups in the United States that are trans support groups are all led by white folks. And you wonder why. You don't see a whole lot of trans Asians.
I come from a family, Japanese ancestry, so I know what my parents and grandparents went through being in a concentration camp, the internment camp, and they're always being aware of their differentness and being careful, trying to help us to fit in, be our best. So my whole perspective on life has been one of differentness and yet inclusion, because by the time I was born in '49, I didn't face any of that kind of negativity. In fact, I was in a community with lots of different ethnic groups, and so it came natural to me that we're lots of different kinds of people. There is so much support out there, whether online, through the phone, through materials, books, DVDs. Just start your search, and you will connect with a world of loving hearts and understanding souls who know what you're going through and they'll do anything for you.
Be yourself and accept other people for who they are too. But you don't have to stay where you are. You can always move and change and improve. Stagnation is death.
For every family who's totally intolerant, I would say there's 2 or 3 more who will still embrace you and love you.
There's a whole planet of people, and there are tons of people that feel and think exactly like you do, and there's nothing wrong with thinking and feeling the way you do.
You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You don't have to worry about what other people think of you. You just have to worry about your comfort level and how you want to express yourself.
So don't settle. Just keep fighting and keep fighting until it's not just a bone thrown at the community.
Don't be afraid. Go ahead and step up.
say that it is my conviction that longer hair and other flamboyant affectations of appearance are nothing more than the male's emergence from his drab camouflage into the gaudy plumage which is the birthright of his sex. That's from Hair.